The notification on my phone read, Inez Walker meltdown is trending worldwide, and had already been viewed 847,000 times. My own children had turned my most vulnerable moment into entertainment, broadcasting my grief to millions of strangers, who were now commenting, sharing, and laughing at the woman who built an empire but couldn't hold her family together. What they didn't know was that while they were counting views and ad revenue, I was already 3 steps ahead, quietly moving assets they didn't even know existed. By the time they realized what those cameras had cost them, $9 billion had already found better homes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Inez Walker, and at 62, I thought I understood betrayal. I built Walker Industries from nothing, turning a small tech startup in my garage into a global powerhouse worth $12 billion. I survived hostile takeovers, market crashes, and boardroom coups that would have destroyed lesser executives. But nothing prepared me for watching my own children destroy me for content. The morning it happened, I was sitting in my home office in Malibu, staring at the termination letter from my own board of directors. After 37 years of building Walker Industries, they had voted me out. The company I created, nurtured, and grew into an international force was no longer mine. The betrayal came from within, orchestrated by my business partner and supposed friend Marcus Chen, who had spent 2 years quietly poisoning key board members against me. I felt hollow, disconnected from everything I thought defined me. The walls of my office were lined with awards, patents, and photographs documenting decades of innovation and success. None of it mattered now. I had given everything to this company, sacrificing relationships, missing family moments, working 18-hour days for decades. And for what? To be discarded the moment they found a younger, more pliable replacement. The grief hit me like a physical blow. I started crying. Not the elegant tears of a composed executive, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose entire identity had just been stripped away. I was alone in that moment. Or so I thought. What I didn't realize was that my daughter Cassandra had set up a hidden camera in my office weeks earlier, supposedly for security purposes, after I mentioned some concerns about corporate espionage. But Cassandra wasn't interested in protecting me. She was building her social media empire, and my pain was about to become her most valuable asset. While I broke down in what I believed was private, she was already going live on her platforms, streaming my devastation to her 2 million followers, with the caption, "When billionaires fall apart, this is what real breakdown looks like." The comments started flowing immediately. Strangers were dissecting my every sob, creating memes from my facial expressions, and sharing clips with cruel captions. Some viewers were sympathetic, but most were entertained by the spectacle of a powerful woman reduced to tears. Within hours, the video had been shared across every major platform, picked up by news outlets, and turned into a viral phenomenon. I discovered what had happened when my assistant, Margaret, called me in tears. "Mrs. Walker, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. "It's everywhere. The whole internet is talking about it." I hung up and immediately searched my name online. The results were devastating. "Billionaire CEO has public meltdown," read one headline. "The fall of Inez Walker caught on camera," announced another. But the worst part wasn't the headlines or even the millions of views. It was seeing my son Derek's name attached as a co-producer of the stream. Derek, my youngest, had always been the charmer of the family. While Cassandra was ambitious and calculating, Derek was the one who could make me laugh, who remembered my birthday without being reminded, who called just to check in. Seeing his involvement in this betrayal felt like a knife twisting in an already open wound. I called Cassandra first, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful as if nothing had happened. "Mom, did you see the numbers? We're trending on every platform. This could be huge for my brand." "Your brand?" I could barely form the words. "Cassandra, you filmed me having a breakdown and broadcast it to the world." "It's just content, Mom. And honestly, it's probably good for you too. People love seeing the human side of successful people. You should lean into this vulnerability thing." I hung up without another word. The casual cruelty in her voice, The complete absence of empathy or regret told me everything I needed to know about who my daughter had become. Derek was next. When he answered, I could hear the guilt in his voice immediately. "Mom, I can explain." "Please do," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Cassie said you needed help with your image, that people saw you as too cold and corporate. She thought showing your emotional side would make you more relatable. I was just helping with the technical setup." "Did it occur to either of you to ask my permission before turning my private grief into public entertainment?" There was a long pause. "We didn't think you'd understand the marketing potential." I ended the call and sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just happened. My children, the two people I loved most in the world, had monetized my pain. They had taken my most vulnerable moment and turned it into content for strangers to consume and judge. But as I sat there, something shifted inside me. The grief began transforming into something sharper, more focused. If my children saw me as nothing more than content to be exploited, then perhaps it was time they learned the true cost of their choices. I walked to my safe and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents that outlined the true scope of my wealth, assets that existed far beyond Walker Industries, investments and holdings that even my own family didn't know about. While everyone focused on the $12 billion valuation of my company, the reality was that my personal net worth was closer to $23 billion, spread across real estate, private equity, cryptocurrency, art, and dozens of shell companies I had established over the years. More importantly, I had been planning for succession for decades, but not in the way my children expected. I had created a complex web of trusts, foundations, and legal structures that would allow me to control the distribution of my wealth with surgical precision. Every asset could be moved, redirected, or donated based on conditions I had established years earlier. My children assumed they were entitled to this fortune, simply by virtue of being born into the Walker family. They had never shown real interest in the business, never demonstrated the discipline or vision required to manage such wealth responsibly. Cassandra was more interested in influencer culture than corporate responsibility, while Derek drifted from one passion project to another, funded by my generosity but never producing anything of lasting value. I had hoped that maturity would change them, that they would eventually develop the character necessary to inherit such responsibility. But this betrayal revealed the truth I had been avoiding. They saw me not as their mother but as their meal ticket. And if I was just a source of content and future inheritance to them, then perhaps it was time to reconsider who truly deserved to benefit from my life's work. I spent the next 3 days in isolation, ignoring the constant stream of calls, texts, and emails from reporters, friends, and business associates. The viral video continued to spread, spawning reaction videos, analysis pieces, and countless memes. My humiliation was complete and global, but I was no longer thinking about damage control. I was planning something much more significant. The first call I made was to Helena Vasquez, my estate attorney and one of the few people who understood the full scope of my holdings. Helena had worked with me for 15 years, helping me structure my wealth in ways that maximized both privacy and flexibility. She was discreet, brilliant, and absolutely loyal. "Helena, I need to implement Protocol 7, I said when she answered. There was a brief pause. Protocol 7 was something we had discussed but never executed. A comprehensive restructuring of my estate that would effectively disinherit my children while redirecting their inheritance to charitable causes. Are you certain about this, Inez? Once we trigger Protocol 7, there's no going back. The legal mechanisms are designed to be irreversible. I'm certain, I replied. How long will it take? 72 hours for the initial transfers. Full implementation will take about 2 weeks. Do it. The next call was to David Kim, my private banker at Goldman Sachs. David managed several of my offshore accounts and had always been available for unusual requests. David, I need to liquidate the Cayman holdings and redirect them according to the instructions in my Delta file. All of them? David sounded surprised. The Cayman holdings were worth approximately $2 billion. All of them. And David, this needs to happen quietly and quickly.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Of course, Mrs. Walker. I'll have the transfers initiated within the hour. By the end of that first day, I had set in motion a plan that would fundamentally alter the lives of everyone involved. While my children continued to profit from my viral humiliation, earning thousands of dollars in ad revenue and sponsorship deals from the video, I was quietly dismantling their future inheritance piece by piece. The beauty of the plan was its elegance. Years of careful legal and financial planning had created a system where I could redirect vast sums of money without anyone's knowledge or consent. My children weren't legally entitled to anything until my death, and even then, only if certain conditions in my will were met. Since they had just publicly humiliated me for profit, those conditions were now void. But I wasn't just taking their inheritance away. I was giving it to people and causes that would actually make a difference in the world. The first recipient was the Morrison Foundation, a charity focused on mental health awareness and suicide prevention. Given how my children had mocked and monetized my emotional breakdown, it seemed fitting that their inheritance should go toward helping others who struggled with similar challenges. $1 billion would go to the Morrison Foundation, enough to fund their operations for decades and dramatically expand their reach. Another $1 billion would go to the Global Education Initiative, providing scholarships and resources for underprivileged students around the world. A third $1 billion would establish the Walker Institute for Innovation, a research facility focused on developing technology solutions for climate change. As I worked through the list of recipients, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pure satisfaction. For decades, I had accumulated wealth primarily as a means of keeping score, proving my success, and securing my family's future. But now, I was discovering the genuine joy of giving money to people who would use it to improve the world rather than simply consume it. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children's greed and cruelty had inadvertently triggered the largest philanthropic redistribution in recent history. They had turned my breakdown into content, but I was turning their inheritance into hope for millions of people they would never meet. On the fourth day, I emerged from my isolation to find that the viral video had been viewed over 50 million times. Cassandra had gained 800,000 new followers and had already signed 3 major endorsement deals based on her newfound notoriety. Derek had launched a podcast called Behind the Billionaire, where he promised to share exclusive family insights about growing up as the child of a tech mogul. They were profiting handsomely from my pain, but they had no idea what it was costing them. I decided it was time for a family meeting. I called both of them and asked them to come to the house that evening. Neither seemed particularly eager to see me, but they both agreed, probably assuming I wanted to discuss damage control or perhaps even find ways to monetize the situation further. They arrived within minutes of each other, Cassandra in her newest designer outfit, and Derek carrying a camera, presumably to record more content. They seemed relaxed, even cheerful, as if they had forgotten that they had just betrayed their own mother for internet fame. "Before we start," Cassandra said, settling into the living room sofa, "I want you to know that my manager thinks we should do a follow-up video. Maybe something where you address the response to the first one. The engagement numbers are incredible." "Actually," Derek added, "I was thinking we could do a whole series, Real Talk with the Walkers or something like that. Show people what it's really like behind the scenes of a billionaire family." I looked at them both, these strangers who shared my DNA but apparently none of my values, and felt a profound sadness that had nothing to do with losing my company. "Tell me," I said quietly, "what did you think when you watched that video? When you saw me crying, breaking down, at the lowest point of my professional life?" Cassandra shrugged. "I thought it was authentic. People are tired of seeing polished, perfect executives. They want to see real emotion, real humanity. And you, Derek?" "I mean, I felt bad that you were upset, but Cassie was right about the authenticity angle. And honestly, Mom, you've always been so controlled, so composed. It was kind of refreshing to see you just be human for once." Neither of them had mentioned asking for my consent. Neither had expressed genuine remorse for violating my privacy. They had reduced my breakdown to a content strategy and my pain to a character development moment in their personal brands. "I see," I said. "And how much money have you made from that video?" Cassandra brightened. "It's been amazing. Between ad revenue, sponsorships, and new follower conversions, I've probably made about $60,000 so far. And that's just the beginning. My agent thinks we could potentially make hundreds of thousands if we play this right. Derek nodded enthusiastically. The podcast is already getting major sponsor interest. Apparently, there's huge demand for insider stories about successful families. They sat there, proudly detailing how they had monetized my suffering, apparently expecting me to be impressed by their entrepreneurial spirit. In that moment, I realized that the gulf between us wasn't just generational or philosophical. It was moral. I want to share something with both of you, I said, reaching for a folder I had placed on the coffee table. While you've been busy profiting from my breakdown, I've been making some changes of my own. I opened the folder and pulled out 2 identical documents, placing one in front of each of them. They were legal notices, officially informing them that they had been removed as beneficiaries from my estate. Cassandra picked up her copy first, her eyes scanning the dense legal language. What is this? It's notification that your inheritance has been revoked and redistributed. Derek looked up from his document, confusion replacing his earlier enthusiasm. What do you mean, redistributed? I mean that the money you were expecting to inherit someday has been given away. $9 billion, to be exact, has been donated to various charitable organizations over the past 4 days. The silence that followed was profound. I watched as the implications slowly dawned on them, as their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief to panic. You can't do that, Cassandra said, her voice rising. That money belongs to our family. Actually, it belonged to me. And now it belongs to people who will use it to make the world better, instead of turning family trauma into entertainment. Derek stood up, his hands shaking. Mom, you can't be serious. You're upset about the video, I get it, but this is insane. You're talking about billions of dollars. $9 billion, to be precise. The same amount I estimate you'll make in total from exploiting my breakdown, multiplied by about 150,000. Cassandra was frantically scrolling through her phone, apparently searching for something. This has to be illegal. You can't just give away our inheritance without notice. I can, and I did. I spent decades building legal structures that would allow me to control the distribution of my wealth based on my assessment of your character and worthiness. This week, you both demonstrated exactly who you are. We made one mistake, Derek pleaded. One video. You're going to destroy our entire future over one mistake? I looked at him with something approaching pity. Derek, you don't understand. This wasn't a mistake. A mistake is something you do accidentally, something you regret immediately. You planned this. You set up cameras, coordinated the streaming, and then spent days promoting and profiting from it. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. People do worse things every day, Cassandra said, her voice now sharp with desperation. We didn't hurt anyone. We didn't break any laws. You hurt me, I said simply. You took the worst moment of my professional life and turned it into entertainment. You violated my privacy, monetized my pain, and showed the world that you see your own mother as nothing more than content to be consumed. But we're your children, Derek said, tears starting to form in his eyes. Doesn't that mean anything? I paused, considering the question that went to the heart of everything. It means everything, which is why this hurts so much. I would have given you anything, done anything for you. Instead, you chose to exploit me for social media fame. Cassandra suddenly stood up, her demeanor shifting from panic to anger. You know what? Fine. Keep your money. I don't need it. I'm building my own empire, my own brand. I'll make more money than you ever did. With what? I asked. Your influencer career? Your sponsorship deals? Cassandra, you have 8 million followers now. And maybe you'll monetize that into a few $1 million over the next decade if you're very lucky and the platforms don't change their algorithms. But you just gave up $9 billion. Do you understand the mathematics of what you've lost? The reality seemed to hit her then, the sheer scale of what was gone. $9 billion represented generational wealth, the kind of money that could fund anything she might ever want to do, any business she might want to start, any cause she might want to support. She had traded all of that for a viral moment and some new followers. Derek was taking a different approach, falling to his knees beside my chair. "Mom, please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know we messed up. But please don't do this. Give us a chance to make it right." "How?" I asked. "How do you make it right? How do you undo broadcasting my private breakdown to 50 million people? How do you take back the memes, the jokes, the cruel comments? How do you restore my privacy and dignity?" He didn't have an answer because there wasn't one. The damage was permanent, irreversible, and global, and so was my response. "I want you both to leave now," I said, standing up. "These documents include contact information for your new legal representation. They'll help you understand your rights, which are essentially none." "Mom," Cassandra said, her voice breaking for the first time since they'd arrived. "You can't mean this. We're your family." "Family doesn't exploit each other for content," I replied. "Family protects each other, supports each other, honors each other's privacy and dignity. You're my children, and I'll always love you, but you're not my family anymore." They left that night, and I haven't spoken to either of them since. In the days that followed, they made several attempts to reach me through intermediaries, lawyers, and even a few mutual friends. Derek wrote me a letter that was delivered by courier, filled with apologies and promises to delete all the content and somehow make amends. Cassandra had her publicist reach out, suggesting we could quote together to control the narrative around our estrangement. But I was done with narratives, done with content, done with being seen as a character in someone else's story. Instead, I focused on the positive aspects of what I had set in motion. The charitable organizations receiving the donations were using the money in remarkable ways. The Morrison Foundation had already announced plans to open 15 new mental health centers in underserved communities. The Global Education Initiative was providing full scholarships to 50,000 students. The Walker Institute for Innovation had attracted some of the world's brightest minds to work on climate solutions. Meanwhile, my children were discovering the long-term consequences of their choices. Without the prospect of inheritance, Cassandra's lifestyle became unsustainable. The designer clothes, luxury travel, and expensive apartment were all funded by credit and expectations of future wealth. As the reality of her situation became clear, sponsors began to withdraw their support. Her follower count, artificially inflated by the viral moment, started to decline as people moved on to the next spectacle. Derek's podcast lasted exactly 6 episodes before being canceled due to low listenership. It turned out that without the promise of genuine insider information about billionaire family life, there wasn't much audience interest in his rambling stories and surface-level insights. He was forced to move back in with his girlfriend's family and take a job at a tech startup, earning 1/10,000th of what he had given up. 6 months after the viral video, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret announced that Derek was in the lobby, asking to see me. I hesitated for a moment, then agreed to meet with him in my office. He looked different. Thinner, more serious, wearing a simple button-down shirt instead of his usual designer casual wear. He sat across from my desk with his hands folded, a posture of humility that I had never seen from him before. "I know you probably don't want to see me," he began, "but I needed to tell you something." I waited. "I've been working at this startup for 6 months now, and I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all those years. About work, about earning things, about the value of money." He paused, looking down at his hands. "I used to think you were just being controlling when you insisted I have summer jobs, when you made me apply for scholarships even though you could have just paid for college outright. I thought it was some old-fashioned power trip. And now I understand that you were trying to give me something more valuable than money. You were trying to give me character, integrity, the ability to create value instead of just consuming it." He looked up, and I could see that he had been crying. I threw all of that away for a stupid video that got me nothing but empty fame. I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope, but I kept my expression neutral. "Derek, what do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said quickly. "I don't want money or forgiveness or another chance at inheritance. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost, and it wasn't the billions of dollars. It was your respect, your trust, your belief in me, and I wanted to tell you that I'm trying to become someone who might eventually deserve those things again, even if I never get them back." He stood up to leave, then paused at the door. "Also, I wanted you to know that I've been following the donations, reading about what the charities are doing with the money. You were right to give it to them instead of us. They're changing people's lives, making the world better. We would have just spent it on ourselves." After he left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, processing what had just happened. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I felt something other than anger or disappointment when I thought about my children. Derek's words suggested that perhaps the loss of inheritance had taught him lessons that inheriting billions never could have. But I also knew that change required more than words, more than a single moment of clarity. Real transformation took time, consistency, and sustained effort. Derek would need to prove his newfound understanding through years of different choices, different priorities, different values. As for Cassandra, I had heard through mutual acquaintances that she was struggling more significantly. Without the financial safety net she had always assumed would be there, she was discovering that influencer fame was both fickle and insufficient to support the lifestyle she wanted. Several friends had reported seeing her at networking events, desperately trying to parlay her viral moment into sustainable business opportunities. Part of me felt sad for both of them, watching them struggle with consequences that were ultimately of their own making. But a larger part of me felt profound satisfaction knowing that $9 billion was being used to address global challenges instead of funding shopping sprees and vacation homes. The viral video that had started this entire chain of events eventually faded from public consciousness, replaced by newer scandals and spectacles. But its impact on my life and on the lives of countless people who would benefit from the redirected wealth would last forever. I had learned something important about the true nature of family, loyalty, and love. Real family protects and supports each other, even when no one is watching, even when there's nothing to be gained. Real love doesn't exploit vulnerability for personal benefit. And real wealth isn't just about accumulating resources. It's about using those resources responsibly and intentionally. My children had seen me as a source of content and future inheritance. But I had discovered that my real legacy wouldn't be the money I left behind. It would be the impact I made while I was still alive to direct it. They had live-streamed my breakdown for the world to see, turning my pain into their profit. In response, I had streamed billions of dollars into better hands, turning their betrayal into hope for millions of people around the world. And for the first time in years, I felt genuinely proud of the choices I had made. The morning after my children left my house in shock, I woke to discover they had not accepted defeat quietly. My phone buzzed with notifications from news alerts, and when I checked the headlines, I saw that Cassandra had given an exclusive interview to Celebrity Access magazine titled, "My Mother's Billionaire Breakdown: The Truth Behind the Viral Video." In the article, she painted herself as a concerned daughter who had been trying to help her emotionally unstable mother cope with professional failure. She claimed that I had always been mentally fragile, that the cameras in my office were there for my own protection, and that she had only shared the footage because she was worried about my well-being and wanted to show the world that even successful people struggle with mental health. The piece was a masterclass in manipulation, portraying me as an unhinged billionaire who had made rash financial decisions in a fit of rage, while positioning her as the mature, responsible child trying to protect both her mother and the family legacy. She even included quotes from unnamed family friends who expressed concern about my recent behavior and suggested that I needed professional help. But what truly stunned me was the final paragraph, where she announced that she and Derek were exploring legal options to challenge my recent charitable donations, claiming that they were made while I was not of sound mind and therefore should be reversed. I set the phone down and walked to my kitchen, where I made coffee with hands that were steadier than they had been in weeks. If they wanted to escalate this conflict into a public battle, I was more than prepared for that war. What they didn't understand was that I had spent decades navigating hostile business environments, dealing with corporate espionage, and protecting my interests from people far more sophisticated than my own children. My first call was to Helena Vasquez, who had been monitoring the legal landscape since we implemented Protocol 7. "Helena, have you seen the Celebrity Access article?" "I have. And I've already been contacted by 3 law firms representing your children." They're claiming undue influence, mental incompetence, and breach of fiduciary duty. I almost laughed. On what grounds? They're arguing that the viral video itself is evidence of a mental breakdown that compromised your decision-making capacity. They want to establish a timeline showing that you made the donations while in an emotionally compromised state. And what's your assessment of their chances? Helena's voice was confident. Minimal. We have extensive documentation showing that the donation decisions were made over several days, with careful consultation and using legal structures you established years ago when you were demonstrably of sound mind. More importantly, we have recordings of every conversation you had with financial advisors during the process, and you were clearly lucid, methodical, and rational throughout. Recordings? Standard practice for large financial transactions, remember? Every call with David Kim, every meeting with the foundation representatives, every legal consultation. You were operating at peak cognitive function throughout the entire process. This was the kind of thoroughness that had made Helena invaluable to me over the years. She anticipated challenges before they arose and built defenses accordingly. What's our next move? We go on the offensive. I'm filing a motion to have their legal challenge dismissed as frivolous, and I'm requesting sanctions against their attorneys for bringing a case without merit. But more importantly, I think it's time to release some of the evidence we've been holding back. She was referring to something we had discovered during the initial investigation into the viral video. When Helena's team examined the technical details of how the video was created and distributed, they found evidence that went far beyond what I had initially suspected. The metadata analysis is complete, Helena continued. The hidden camera in your office wasn't installed recently for security purposes, as Cassandra claimed. It had been there for 8 months, and during that time, it recorded over 300 hours of footage of you working, taking meetings, and having private conversations. My blood chilled. 300 hours? They were apparently planning some kind of documentary or reality show about your life, without your knowledge or consent. The breakdown video wasn't opportunistic, it was part of a systematic invasion of your privacy that had been going on for months. The implications were staggering. For 8 months, my children had been secretly recording me in my own home, capturing private business conversations, personal phone calls, and intimate moments they had no right to witness. The breakdown video wasn't an isolated betrayal. It was the culmination of a long-term surveillance operation. There's more, Helena said. We've traced the financial flows from the viral video, and your children earn significantly more than they disclosed to you. Between direct ad revenue, sponsored content, merchandise sales, and licensing deals, they've made approximately $2 million from your breakdown. I sat down heavily in my desk chair. They had looked me in the eye and told me they made $60,000, when the real figure was 20 times higher. Even in their confession, they had lied to me. Helena, I want you to file a civil lawsuit against both of them. Invasion of privacy, unauthorized recording, copyright infringement, and whatever other charges apply. I want the full $2 million in damages, plus punitive damages, plus all legal costs. Are you sure? This will make the conflict very public, very ugly. They made it public when they gave that interview. Now they get to learn that declaring war on someone with unlimited legal resources isn't a smart strategy. After hanging up with Helena, I called David Kim to discuss the next phase of my plan. The $9 billion I had already donated was just the beginning. There were still $14 billion in assets under my control, and I had decided that my children's behavior warranted an even more comprehensive response. David, I want to establish the Inez Walker Foundation for Digital Privacy Rights. Initial funding of $2 billion. Certainly. What will be the foundation's focus? Protecting people from unauthorized recording and exploitation by family members. We'll provide legal resources for victims of intimate partner surveillance, fund research into digital privacy laws, and lobby for stronger protections against non-consensual recording. It was beautifully ironic. My children's invasion of my privacy would fund an organization dedicated to preventing others from experiencing similar violations. Their betrayal would become a shield, protecting countless future victims from the same kind of exploitation. I also want to establish the Walker Institute for Ethical Content Creation. Another $2 billion. What would that organization do? research and education about the ethics of using real people as content, especially vulnerable individuals. They'll develop standards for consent, create educational programs for content creators, and provide resources for people who have been exploited for entertainment. Again, the poetic justice was perfect. The money they expected to inherit would instead be used to educate future content creators about the exact kind of exploitation they had committed against me. By the end of that day, I had redirected another $4 billion away from my children's future inheritance and toward causes that would directly address the harm they had caused. But I wasn't finished. Over the next week, while Helena's legal team prepared our counter-offensive, I began receiving disturbing reports from my security team. Apparently, Cassandra and Derek were not content to limit their attacks to legal challenges and media interviews. They had begun what could only be described as a stalking campaign. My head of security, James Rodriguez, briefed me on what his team had observed. "Mrs. Walker, your daughter has been parked outside the property gates every morning for the past 5 days. She's not attempting to enter, but she's recording video of anyone who comes or goes. And Derek? He's been more subtle. We've spotted him at the coffee shop you frequent, at your gym, and outside your attorney's office. He's always at a distance, always with a camera, always filming." They were apparently planning some kind of documentary about my alleged mental breakdown, gathering footage to support their narrative that I was unstable and making irrational decisions. The irony was that their stalking behavior was actually proving my point about their character and judgment. "James, I want you to document everything. Every instance of surveillance, every location where they've been spotted, every person they've approached asking questions about me. I want a comprehensive record of their harassment campaign." "Already doing that, ma'am. And Mrs. Walker, there's something else you should know. We've intercepted communications suggesting they're planning some kind of public confrontation. Nothing violent, but they apparently want to create another viral moment." I wasn't surprised. Having tasted the intoxicating combination of fame and profit that came from exploiting my private moments, they were apparently addicted to the attention and desperate to recapture that initial success. "What kind of confrontation?" "Based on what we've overheard, they're planning to show up at one of your public appearances with cameras rolling, demanding to have a conversation about your mental health and the donations. They want to create a scene that will generate sympathy for them and make you look unstable." The next day, I was scheduled to attend the opening ceremony for the Morrison Foundation's first new mental health center, funded by the billion-dollar donation I had made from my children's former inheritance. It would be the perfect venue for their planned ambush, given the symbolic significance of the location. I called Helena and updated her on the security briefing. "This is actually good news," she said. "If they confront you publicly while you're engaged in charitable work, it will dramatically undermine their narrative about your mental state. A person having a breakdown doesn't typically make calm, strategic charitable donations and then show up to thoughtfully participate in the implementation of those gifts. Should I be worried about the confrontation itself? Not if you handle it properly. Stay calm, don't engage with their accusations, and let them reveal their own desperation and poor judgment. The more erratic they appear in contrast to your composed demeanor, the better it is for our case." The Morrison Foundation ceremony was held at a community center in East Los Angeles, in a neighborhood that had been underserved by mental health resources for decades. The new facility would provide counseling, crisis intervention, and support groups for thousands of people who previously had nowhere to turn during mental health emergencies. As I walked toward the building, I spotted the news vans and paparazzi photographers who had clearly been tipped off about the expected confrontation. Cassandra and Derek were positioned near the entrance, both holding professional-grade cameras and wearing wireless microphones. They had apparently coordinated with a streaming platform to broadcast whatever was about to happen live. I approached the entrance calmly, flanked by James and 2 other members of my security team. As I reached the steps, Cassandra stepped forward. "Mom, we need to talk," she said loudly, clearly speaking as much to the cameras as to me. "You can't keep avoiding us. We're worried about you and we think you need help." I paused and looked at her directly. "Cassandra, this is neither the time nor the place for a private family conversation." "There's nothing private about it anymore," Derek interjected, moving closer with his camera. You've made this whole situation public by giving away our family's money while you were having a breakdown. Several dozen people had gathered to watch the confrontation, including reporters, foundation staff, and community members who had come to celebrate the opening of the new facility. Are you here to support mental health services in this community? I asked them both. We're here because you're clearly not thinking rationally, Cassandra replied. You gave away $9 billion out of spite, and now you're pretending it was some kind of charitable impulse. So you're not here to support mental health services? We're here to get our mother the help she needs, Derek said. I nodded thoughtfully, then addressed the crowd that had gathered. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my children, Cassandra and Derek Walker. 8 months ago, they installed a hidden camera in my home office and spent months secretly recording me without my knowledge or consent. 2 weeks ago, they broadcast my private breakdown to 50 million people and earned over $1 million from my pain. Today, they're here with cameras again, trying to exploit a mental health facility opening for more content. The crowd's murmur shifted noticeably. Several people began taking pictures of Cassandra and Derek, who suddenly looked less confident than they had moments earlier. The reason they're upset, I continued, is that I chose to donate their expected inheritance to organizations like the Morrison Foundation, which will use that money to help people instead of turning human suffering into entertainment. She's lying, Cassandra said desperately. She's having a breakdown right now. Can't you see how paranoid and unstable she sounds? But her words rang hollow in the context of the setting. We were standing in front of a mental health facility that existed because of my donation, surrounded by grateful community members and dedicated mental health professionals. I was clearly lucid, articulate, and engaged in meaningful charitable work. Derek tried a different approach. We just want our family back, he said, his voice breaking slightly. We made mistakes, but she's destroying our entire future over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I asked. You secretly recorded me for 8 months, broadcast my breakdown worldwide, earned over $1 million from my pain, and then lied to me about how much you made. Which part of that was a misunderstanding? By now, several news reporters were interviewing bystanders, and the consensus was clearly not favorable to my children. One community leader spoke directly to a camera. This woman just gave $1 billion to bring mental health services to our neighborhood. Her kids are out here harassing her with cameras, trying to take that money away from us. Who exactly is the problem here? Cassandra and Derek realized that their planned ambush had backfired spectacularly. Instead of creating a viral moment showing them as concerned children dealing with an unstable mother, they had revealed themselves as entitled opportunists disrupting a charitable event to demand money they felt entitled to. They left without another word, but I knew this wasn't over. People who are willing to secretly record their own mother for months don't typically accept defeat gracefully. That evening, Helena called with an update on their legal challenge. The judge dismissed their petition completely. She said there was no credible evidence of mental incompetence, and that their own behavior raised more questions about their judgment than yours. She also agreed to hear our motion for sanctions against their legal team. And our civil lawsuit? Moving forward aggressively. We've subpoenaed their financial records related to the viral video, and we're demanding access to all the footage they recorded over those 8 months. If there are other invasions of privacy we don't know about yet, we'll find them. What kind of other invasions? Think about it, Inez. If they were recording your office for 8 months, where else might they have placed cameras? Your bedroom? Your bathroom? Private conversations with friends? We need to assume the worst and investigate accordingly. The thought made me physically ill. The idea that my children might have been recording my most intimate private moments, potentially for years, was almost too horrifying to contemplate. Helena, I want you to hire the best digital forensics team available. I want them to sweep my entire property for recording devices, analyze every piece of equipment my children had access to, and recover any footage that might exist. Already in progress. We should have results within 48 hours. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house looking at every room with new eyes, wondering what private moments my children might have captured and commodified. The violation felt worse than the original viral video because it suggested a level of premeditation and systematic exploitation that went far beyond opportunistic content creation. I thought about all the times over the past 8 months when I believed I was alone in my office. Private phone calls with friends going through divorces. Confidential business conversations about acquisitions and personnel decisions. Personal moments of grief when I thought about my deceased husband. Medical consultations with my doctor. All of it potentially recorded, potentially analyzed, potentially prepared for future exploitation. The next morning brought news that made everything even worse. Helena's forensics team had found evidence of additional cameras throughout my house. My bedroom, my bathroom, my kitchen, even my garden, where I sometimes sat quietly to think or make private phone calls. "How long?" I asked when Helena called with the results. "The earliest timestamps we've found go back 2 years. They've been systematically documenting your private life for at least that long, possibly longer. 2 years, 730 days of my private life, recorded without my knowledge or consent by my own children. Every personal conversation, every vulnerable moment, every private activity potentially captured and stored for future use. What were they planning to do with all of this footage? Based on the file organization and metadata, it appears they were creating some kind of comprehensive documentary or reality show about your life. They have over 800 hours of footage organized by location, date, and apparent content themes. Themes? Business meetings, personal conversations, medical consultations, private moments. It's all cataloged like they were building a comprehensive archive of your existence. I had to sit down. The scope of the violation was beyond anything I had imagined. They hadn't just exploited one moment of vulnerability. They had turned my entire life into a secret surveillance project. Helena, I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This isn't just civil liability anymore. This is criminal activity." "I agree. I'm contacting the district attorney's office today. This level of systematic invasion of privacy could result in felony charges. And I want to increase our civil damages claim. Not just the $2 million they earned from the viral video. I want compensation for every hour of footage they captured over 2 years. That would be approximately 800 hours at, let's say, a conservative rate of $10,000 per hour for unauthorized intimate recordings. $8 million in basic damages, plus punitive damages that could be in the tens of millions. Do it!" But as I thought about the criminal and civil cases moving forward, I realized that legal justice wasn't enough. My children had demonstrated a level of moral bankruptcy that required a more comprehensive response. They hadn't just betrayed me once. They had been systematically exploiting me for years while pretending to love and respect me. I called David Kim and authorized another major transfer. "David, I want to establish the Walker Center for Family Privacy Protection. $3 billion. What would this organization focus on? Helping victims of family surveillance and exploitation. Legal aid for people being secretly recorded by relatives. Safe housing for people who need to escape family members who are exploiting them. And research into the psychological impact of intimate betrayal." It was fitting. My children's systematic violation of my privacy would fund an organization dedicated to protecting other people from exactly the same kind of family exploitation. I also want to create a scholarship fund specifically for young people who have been disowned or cut off by their families due to ethical disagreements. Another $1 billion. Any particular requirements for the scholarships? Recipients must demonstrate that they lost family financial support because they refused to participate in unethical behavior, or because they whistle-blew on family wrongdoing, or because they stood up for their principles in opposition to family pressure. Again, the irony was perfect. The money my children expected to inherit would instead support young people who had made the ethical choices that my own children had failed to make. By the end of that week, I had redirected another $4 billion away from my children's future inheritance. They had cost themselves $13 billion through their systematic betrayal and exploitation. But the psychological impact was taking its toll on me as well. Discovering the extent of their surveillance had left me feeling violated in ways that went beyond financial or legal harm. Every memory of the past 2 years was now tainted by the knowledge that my children had been watching, recording and cataloging my private moments like scientists studying a laboratory specimen. I decided I needed to leave Los Angeles for a while, to get some distance from the house where I had been unknowingly observed for so long. I owned a small ranch in Montana that my children had rarely visited, a place where I could think clearly without worrying about hidden cameras or surveillance. The property was 1,500 acres of pristine wilderness, with a modest cabin that I had kept deliberately simple. No smart home technology, no internet connectivity, no devices that could be hacked or monitored. It was the closest thing to complete privacy I could imagine. I drove there alone, taking back roads and stopping only for gas and food. I needed to process what had happened, to understand how my children had become the kind of people who could systematically exploit their own mother for years without apparent remorse. The cabin was exactly as I had left it 6 months earlier. Simple furniture, basic amenities, and most importantly, complete silence. No phone notifications, no news alerts, no constant stream of information about what people were saying about me online. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I spent 3 days hiking the property, sitting by the stream that ran through the eastern section, and trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The betrayal hurt, but what hurt more was the realization of how long it had been going on. For 2 years, every interaction with my children had been a performance for them. Every hug, every family dinner, every expression of love had been tainted by their secret surveillance project. They had been studying me like an exotic animal, documenting my behavior patterns, cataloging my vulnerabilities, and planning how to monetize my private life. And throughout that entire period, I had believed we were family. On the 4th day, my solitude was interrupted by the sound of a helicopter. I looked up to see a news helicopter circling the property, clearly trying to get footage of me in my retreat. Apparently, someone had leaked information about where I was staying. Within hours, there were news vans parked along the access road to my property, photographers with telephoto lenses trying to capture pictures of me through the windows, and reporters doing live broadcasts about my mental state and my decision to isolate myself. I called James Rodriguez, who confirmed what I had suspected. "Ma'am, your children gave an interview to Access Hollywood yesterday. They revealed the location of your Montana property and suggested that you were having a complete mental breakdown, hiding from reality because you couldn't cope with the consequences of your rash financial decisions. Even in my retreat, they were still exploiting me for content, still trying to control the narrative, still treating my private life as material for public consumption. I packed my bags and left that same day, but not before making one more financial decision. I called David Kim from the road. David, I want to purchase the largest independent media company we can acquire within the next 48 hours. Budget, $5 billion. Any particular type of media company? Something with significant reach and influence. I want to control a platform that can tell stories properly, without exploitation or sensationalism. I'll have options for you by tomorrow morning. If my children wanted to use media as a weapon against me, I would show them what real media power looked like. They had a few million social media followers and access to celebrity gossip shows. I was about to own an entire media empire. The war was escalating, but I had resources they couldn't even imagine, and I was just getting started. The media company I acquired was Meridian Communications, a conglomerate that owned 3 cable news networks, 12 regional newspapers, 4 documentary production companies, and one of the largest podcast networks in North America. The purchase was completed in 36 hours for $4.8 billion, and by the end of that week, I owned a media empire with a combined audience of over 40 million people. My first directive to the new management team was simple. We would no longer produce content that exploited people in vulnerable situations for entertainment value. No more reality shows that mocked people's personal struggles. No more invasive celebrity coverage that violated privacy. And absolutely no more content that turned family dysfunction into public spectacle. Instead, we would focus on investigative journalism that held powerful people accountable, documentary programming that educated rather than exploited, and news coverage that prioritized accuracy over sensationalism. It was the opposite of everything my children represented in their content creation approach. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now positioned to control the narrative around my own story in ways that my children could never match. They had social media followers and access to gossip shows, But I owned actual news networks with professional journalists and editorial standards. Helena called me the morning after the acquisition was announced. Inez, the district attorney has agreed to pursue criminal charges against your children. They're being charged with conspiracy to commit invasion of privacy, unauthorized recording, and cyberstalking. If convicted, they could face up to 3 years in prison. And our civil case? Even stronger now that we have criminal charges pending. The DA's investigation has uncovered additional evidence we didn't have access to, including communications between your children, where they explicitly discussed plans to monetize your private footage. What kind of communications? Text messages, emails, and recorded phone calls where they talk about which of your private moments would be most valuable to different types of media buyers. They were apparently shopping your footage around to reality TV producers, documentary filmmakers, and even tabloid magazines. I felt sick. They hadn't just recorded me for their own social media content, they had been treating my private life like a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. There's something else, Helena continued. We've discovered that they had a business partnership with a production company called Viral Moment Media. This wasn't just opportunistic exploitation. It was a systematic business venture designed to profit from your private life. A business partnership? Complete with contracts, revenue-sharing agreements, and development deals for a full reality series called Behind the Billions, The Real Inez Walker. They were planning to launch it this fall, with or without your consent. The scope of their betrayal continued to expand. They hadn't just violated my privacy, they had built an entire business model around exploiting me. Every family interaction over the past 2 years had been a performance designed to generate content for their secret television show. Helena, I want to buy Viral Moment Media. Why would you want to own the company that was exploiting you? Because I want access to every contract, every communication, every piece of evidence related to their plans to exploit me. And because I want to shut them down permanently. That could be seen as vindictive rather than strategic. It's both. But more importantly, it's protective. If I own them, I control all the footage and materials related to their exploitation operation. No one else can purchase the rights to broadcast my private life. Within 48 hours, my legal team had acquired Viral Moment Media for $200 million. The company's assets included not just the footage of me, but similar exploitation operations targeting dozens of other wealthy and famous individuals. I had accidentally uncovered an entire industry built around secretly recording and monetizing the private lives of people without their consent. The company's files revealed the disturbing scope of their operations. They had business partnerships with the family members and close associates of over 60 high-profile individuals, all designed to capture private footage that could be turned into reality programming or sold to tabloid media outlets. I immediately shut down all of these operations and began the process of notifying the victims that they had been secretly recorded. Many of them were grateful for the heads up and joined forces with me to pursue legal action against the people who had betrayed their trust. But the most shocking discovery was a series of communications between Cassandra and the company's CEO, revealing that my breakdown video was actually the test case for a much larger business model. If the video generated enough revenue and attention, they planned to secretly record dozens of other wealthy parents and broadcast their private struggles for public entertainment. My children hadn't just betrayed me. They had been planning to franchise their betrayal operation and target other families with the same exploitation scheme. I called an emergency board meeting at Meridian Communications and outlined a new initiative. I want us to produce a documentary series called The Privacy Thieves, I told the assembled executives. We're going to expose the entire industry of family surveillance and exploitation, starting with Viral Moment Media but expanding to cover similar operations nationwide. Are you sure you want to make this personal story so public? Asked the head of documentary programming. It's already public. My children made sure of that. But now we're going to tell the complete story, not just the parts that made them money. Within a week, we had assembled a team of investigative journalists and documentary filmmakers to begin production on the series. The first episode would focus on my own case, but subsequent episodes would examine similar exploitation operations that targeted other families. The response from my children was immediate and predictable. They held a press conference where they accused me of using my newly acquired media properties to wage a vindictive campaign against them. They claimed that I was abusing my wealth and power to destroy their careers and reputations simply because I was embarrassed about my breakdown being made public. Cassandra appeared on 3 different news programs that week, portraying herself as a young entrepreneur being crushed by her billionaire mother's unlimited resources. She claimed that her social media business was being destroyed by my relentless legal harassment, and that she was being punished for trying to help me during a mental health crisis. Derek took a different approach, appearing on a podcast where he broke down crying while describing how his mother had become a completely different person after losing her company. He suggested that my philanthropic donations were actually symptoms of a manic episode, and that my media acquisition was evidence of grandiose delusions. Their performances were compelling, and they generated significant sympathy from audiences who only knew the surface details of our conflict. Several prominent social media influencers began organizing a campaign called Save the Walker Kids, encouraging their followers to boycott Meridian Communications properties until I stopped persecuting my own children. But they had made a critical mistake in their media strategy. By going on the offensive so aggressively, they had opened themselves up to much deeper scrutiny of their own behavior. And as the owner of multiple news networks, I had the resources to provide that scrutiny. The first Privacy Thieves documentary aired 3 weeks later, and it was devastating. Using the communications and contracts we had acquired from Viral Moment Media, we were able to show exactly how my children had systematically planned and executed their exploitation operation. The documentary included audio recordings of Cassandra discussing which of my private moments would be most viral, and video of Derek installing hidden cameras throughout my house while I was away on business trips. It showed the business contracts they had signed, the revenue projections they had made, and the expansion plans they had developed for targeting other wealthy families. Most damaging of all, it included footage that they had recorded but never released. Hours of me grieving privately after my husband's death, personal conversations with my doctor about health concerns, and intimate moments that no child should ever witness, let alone record and commodify. The public reaction was swift and decisive. The Save the Walker Kids campaign collapsed within hours of the documentary's release. Sponsors began dropping Cassandra's social media partnerships, and Derek's podcast was canceled by its streaming platform. More importantly, other victims of family surveillance began coming forward with their own stories. The documentary had opened the floodgates for people who had been secretly exploited by relatives but had been too ashamed or intimidated to speak out. Within a month, we had documented over 200 similar cases nationwide. Adult children recording elderly parents with dementia for elder abuse comedy content. Spouses secretly streaming their partner's private struggles with addiction or mental health issues. Siblings monetizing family dramas and personal conflicts for reality TV and social media fame. The scope of family exploitation was far larger than I had realized, and my children's betrayal was just one example of a much broader social problem. I decided to expand my philanthropic response accordingly. I established the National Family Privacy Protection Fund, with an initial endowment of $3 billion. The fund would provide legal representation for victims of family exploitation, safe housing for people who needed to escape surveillance situations, and lobbying efforts to strengthen privacy laws around intimate recording. The fund also established a reward program offering up to $1 million for information leading to the conviction of people who secretly recorded family members for commercial purposes. Within weeks of the program's launch, we were receiving hundreds of tips about exploitation operations across the country. But my children weren't finished with their counterattack. Unable to compete with me in traditional media, they pivoted to a more desperate strategy: international platforms and alternative media networks that operated outside normal journalistic standards. Cassandra signed an exclusive interview deal with a notorious tabloid television producer known for sensationalized content about celebrity family feuds. The resulting 3-part series portrayed me as a mentally unstable billionaire who had weaponized my wealth against my own children in a fit of narcissistic rage. The series included heavily edited footage from my private recordings, presented without context to make me appear erratic and irrational. They featured interviews with several people I had fired from Walker Industries over the years, all of whom claimed that I had always been controlling and vindictive. Most disturbing, they had somehow obtained private medical records suggesting that I had been prescribed anti-anxiety medication, which they presented as evidence that I was mentally unfit to control billions of dollars in assets. The medical records were particularly troubling because they implied a level of invasion of privacy that went beyond anything my children had admitted to previously. Obtaining someone's private medical information requires sophisticated hacking or insider access that suggested they had criminal accomplices. I called Helena immediately. Helena, someone illegally accessed my medical records. This isn't just family betrayal anymore. This is organized criminal activity. I agree. I'm contacting the FBI Cybercrime Division today. Medical record theft is a federal felony, and if your children are involved, they're looking at serious prison time. What about the tabloid series? Can we get it pulled? Possibly. If the medical records were illegally obtained, any content based on them could be subject to court injunction. And if we can prove the other footage was edited deceptively, we might have grounds for defamation claims. But even as we prepared our legal response, I realized that my children had crossed a line that went beyond anything our family conflict could resolve. They were now working with criminals to obtain private information about me, and they were using that information to try to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could regain access to their inheritance. This was no longer a family dispute. It was an organized criminal conspiracy designed to steal my assets by destroying my reputation and legal standing. I called an emergency meeting with my security team, legal advisors, and the executives at Meridian Communications. I want everyone to understand that we're now dealing with serious criminal activity, I began. My children are working with people who have illegally accessed medical records, potentially hired hackers to infiltrate private systems, and are engaged in what amounts to an organized campaign to steal billions of dollars through defamation and fraud. James Rodriguez nodded grimly. We've been tracking increased surveillance around all your properties. Professional-level stuff, not just amateur stalking. Someone with significant resources is coordinating intelligence gathering about your activities. What kind of surveillance? Drones with high-resolution cameras, telephoto photography from multiple angles, electronic monitoring of your communications, and what appears to be attempts to place listening devices in your vehicles. The scope was frightening. My children had apparently escalated from family betrayal to hiring criminal organizations to conduct comprehensive surveillance and intelligence operations against me. Helena spoke next. The legal implications are severe. If we can prove that your children hired criminals to obtain your medical records and conduct surveillance, they're looking at RICO charges for organized criminal activity. We're not just talking about civil penalties anymore. They could face decades in federal prison. What's our next move? Full cooperation with federal law enforcement. The FBI is taking this seriously because medical record theft often indicates broader identity theft and financial fraud operations. They want to investigate whether your children are connected to similar schemes targeting other wealthy individuals. And our media response? The head of news programming leaned forward. We have enough evidence now to produce a comprehensive exposé about the criminal organization that's targeting you. But if we do that, it becomes very difficult to portray this as anything other than a complete breakdown in your relationship with your children. I considered this carefully. Going public with the full scope of the criminal activity would certainly destroy any remaining public sympathy for Cassandra and Derek. But it would also mean acknowledging that my own children had become criminals willing to steal my medical records and hire surveillance specialists to destroy me. Do it, I said finally. The truth is the truth, regardless of how painful it is for our family. The resulting investigative series was titled, The Walker Conspiracy: How Two Children Became Criminals. It aired over 5 consecutive nights and documented the complete evolution of my children's betrayal from simple privacy violations to organized criminal activity. The series revealed that Cassandra and Derek had been working with a criminal organization called Digital Exploitation Networks, which specialized in obtaining private information about wealthy individuals and using that information to produce compromising content for blackmail or public humiliation purposes. The organization's business model was sophisticated and deeply disturbing. They would identify wealthy parents with adult children who were willing to cooperate in exchange for a share of the profits. The children would provide access to their parents' homes, personal information, and private lives. The criminal organization would then use professional surveillance techniques to gather comprehensive intelligence that could be monetized in various ways. Some victims were simply blackmailed privately. Others had their private information sold to tabloid media outlets. The most valuable targets, like me, were subjected to comprehensive exploitation campaigns designed to destroy their reputations and create opportunities for the criminals and their family collaborators to gain control of assets. The series revealed that similar operations were being conducted against at least 30 other wealthy families across the country, generating millions of dollars in profits for the criminal organization and their family collaborators. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours of the series premiere, the FBI had arrested the leadership of digital exploitation networks, and prosecutors had issued federal warrants for Cassandra and Derek. My children were now federal fugitives, facing charges that could result in 25 years in prison if they were convicted. But rather than surrender and attempt to negotiate plea agreements, they chose to escalate even further. Using encrypted communication channels and international financial networks, they began coordinating with foreign criminal organizations to continue their campaign against me. Within a week of the federal warrants being issued, I began receiving death threats from untraceable sources. My security team discovered explosive devices planted on 2 of my properties. And someone hacked into my personal banking systems and attempted to transfer $50 million to offshore accounts controlled by unknown parties. James Rodriguez briefed me on the evolving threat level. Mrs. Walker, we're now dealing with international criminal organizations that specialize in targeting wealthy individuals for systematic exploitation and theft. Your children appear to have become assets in a much larger criminal enterprise. Are you saying they're working with foreign criminals now? Based on the intelligence we're gathering, yes. They've apparently offered these organizations access to your complete personal and financial information in exchange for help destroying your reputation and potentially gaining access to your assets. The betrayal was now complete. My children had progressed from exploiting me for social media content to working with international criminals to potentially have me killed so they could inherit my wealth. I made a decision that I never thought I would have to make about my own children. James, I want you to coordinate with federal law enforcement to have Cassandra and Derek designated as national security threats. If they're working with foreign criminal organizations to target American citizens and assets, they're no longer just family problems. They're potential terrorists. Are you certain about that designation? They're working with foreign criminals to destroy American businesses, steal American assets, and potentially harm American citizens. If that's not a national security threat, what is? Within 24 hours, my children were added to federal watch lists as persons of interest in national security investigations. Their passports were flagged, their financial accounts were frozen, and international law enforcement agencies were notified to apprehend them if they attempted to travel abroad. But even as the criminal investigation expanded, I realized that I needed to take additional steps to protect not just myself, but all the people and organizations that had become part of this conflict. The charitable organizations I had funded were receiving threats from the same criminal networks. The journalists working on the documentary series were being stalked and harassed. Even my former business associates were being targeted because of their connection to me. I called an emergency meeting with the boards of all the foundations I had established. I want everyone to understand that you're now potentially at risk because of your association with my charitable donations, I told them. The criminal organizations targeting me have indicated that they consider anyone who benefits from my philanthropy to be legitimate targets for retaliation. The room was silent as the implications sank in. However, I continued, I'm not going to let criminals dictate how my money is used or who benefits from my charitable giving. Instead, I'm going to expand our security operations to protect everyone involved in our charitable work. I announced the establishment of the Philanthropic Security Initiative, a private security organization funded with $2 billion and tasked with protecting charitable organizations, their staff, and their beneficiaries from criminal retaliation. The initiative would provide professional security services to any nonprofit organization that was being threatened because of their association with major donors. It would also fund research into criminal organizations that target charitable giving and work with law enforcement to disrupt those operations. Furthermore, I announced, I'm establishing a reward fund of $1 billion for information leading to the capture and conviction of any person who threatens, harms, or attempts to harm charitable organizations or their beneficiaries. The message was clear. Attacking charitable organizations would now be one of the most expensive criminal activities in the world. But I wasn't satisfied with just defensive measures. My children and their criminal collaborators had declared war on my philanthropic efforts, and I was prepared to wage that war with every resource at my disposal. I authorized the acquisition of a private military contracting company for $5 billion. The company specialized in protecting civilians in dangerous environments and conducting intelligence operations against criminal organizations. Using this new asset, I began systematic operations to identify and disrupt the criminal networks that were targeting me and other wealthy philanthropists. The operations were conducted in full cooperation with federal law enforcement and international partners, but they were funded and directed by my organization rather than being limited by government bureaucracy and resource constraints. Within 6 months, we had successfully dismantled 12 different criminal organizations that specialized in exploiting wealthy families. We had recovered stolen assets worth over $400 million for victims of these operations. And we had provided evidence that led to the conviction of over 200 criminals involved in family exploitation schemes. But my children remained at large, apparently being protected by criminal networks that saw them as valuable assets in their ongoing operations against wealthy Americans. The FBI kept me updated on their investigation, but the news was consistently disturbing. Mrs. Walker, the lead agent, told me during our monthly briefing, "Your children appear to have become key figures in an international criminal organization that specializes in targeting wealthy families. They're providing intelligence, financial information, and operational support for criminal activities targeting dozens of other families. Are they still in the United States? We believe they're operating from multiple international locations, using encrypted communications and cryptocurrency transactions to coordinate with criminal networks. They've essentially become professional criminals specializing in family exploitation and asset theft." The final transformation was complete. My children had gone from social media influencers to criminal fugitives to international criminals specializing in destroying families for profit. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that my response to their original betrayal had revealed the true scope of a criminal industry that was systematically targeting wealthy families across America. By fighting back against my children's exploitation, I had accidentally uncovered and begun dismantling an entire criminal ecosystem. The money I had donated to charitable causes was now being used to protect other families from the same kind of exploitation I had experienced. The media properties I had acquired were exposing criminal operations that law enforcement had never fully understood. The security organizations I had funded were providing protection for people who would otherwise have been defenseless against systematic exploitation. My children's betrayal had cost them their inheritance, their freedom, and their country. But it had also triggered the largest anti-exploitation initiative in history, protecting thousands of families from the same kind of systematic abuse. In trying to destroy me, they had inadvertently funded their own destruction and the protection of countless future victims. The viral video that started this entire conflict had generated $2 million for them, but it had triggered philanthropic giving of over $15 billion that would protect families for generations to come. They had turned my private breakdown into public entertainment, but I had turned their betrayal into a global movement for family protection and criminal justice. The cameras they had used to exploit me were now being used by law enforcement to capture and convict criminals around the world. Justice, I realized, wasn't just about punishment. It was about using resources and power to prevent future victims from experiencing the same harm. My children would eventually face legal consequences for their crimes, but the real victory was in the thousands of families who would never experience exploitation because of the systems we had built in response to their betrayal. 2 years after my children became international fugitives, I received an encrypted message through channels that my security team had been monitoring for months. The message was brief and contained coordinates for a location in Geneva, Switzerland, along with a single line: "Mother, we need to talk. Come alone." It was signed with Cassandra's childhood nickname for herself, something only she would know. After 24 months of silence, my daughter was finally ready to make contact. James Rodriguez was adamantly opposed to any meeting. "Mrs. Walker, this could be a trap. Your children are working with criminal organizations that have made multiple attempts on your life. Meeting them alone in a foreign country would be incredibly dangerous. But it could also be an opportunity to end this war," I replied. "If they're ready to surrender and provide information about the criminal networks they've been working with, that intelligence could save hundreds of other families from exploitation." Helena Vasquez was equally concerned. "Even if they're genuinely seeking reconciliation, they're still facing federal charges that could result in decades in prison. They might be desperate enough to try anything, including violence." Despite these warnings, I felt compelled to respond to the message. For 2 years, I had been fighting a war against criminal organizations that my own children had joined. I had spent billions of dollars protecting other families from exploitation, dismantled international criminal networks, and turned my personal tragedy into a global movement for family privacy protection. But none of that had brought me any closer to understanding how my children had become the people they were now. I authorized a carefully planned operation to meet with them. Rather than going alone as they had requested, I arranged for a multi-layered security presence that would be invisible to them but capable of protecting me if the meeting turned violent. I also coordinated with Swiss law enforcement and Interpol to ensure that appropriate authorities would be prepared to arrest Cassandra and Derek if they attempted to flee. The meeting location was a small cafe in Geneva's financial district, chosen because it was public enough to discourage violence but private enough for sensitive conversation. I arrived 30 minutes early and positioned myself at a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances and exits. Cassandra entered first, and I almost didn't recognize her. The confident, glamorous influencer had been replaced by a thin, nervous woman, with dark circles under her eyes and an anxious demeanor that suggested months of stress and fear. She wore simple clothes and no makeup, looking more like a refugee than the social media celebrity she had once been. Derek followed a few minutes later, and his transformation was even more dramatic. The charming, carefree young man I remembered had become gaunt and hollow-eyed, with the paranoid alertness of someone who had been living in constant fear of capture. They sat across from me in silence for several minutes, neither seeming to know how to begin the conversation they had requested. Finally, Cassandra spoke. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I should," I replied honestly. "The last 2 years have been challenging for everyone involved." Derek looked around nervously before leaning forward. "Mom, we need you to know that we never intended for things to escalate this far. When we started recording you, it was just supposed to be social media content. We never planned to work with criminals or become fugitives." "But you did work with criminals," I pointed out. "You sold my private medical information to tabloid producers. You hired professional surveillance teams to spy on me. You coordinated with international criminal organizations to steal my assets. Those weren't accidents or misunderstandings." Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. "It started small. After the viral video made so much money, we were contacted by people who said they could help us make even more. They seemed legitimate at first, just media producers and marketing consultants." "When did you realize they were criminals?" "Not until it was too late to get out," Derek said. "By the time we understood what we had gotten involved with, they had enough evidence of our activities to blackmail us into continuing. If we tried to leave, they threatened to release footage that would have sent us to prison." "What kind of footage?" "Video of us installing cameras in your house, audio recordings of us discussing plans to exploit you, written contracts showing that we had been planning the exploitation for years. They had documented everything we did, and they used it to control us." I studied their faces, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. They appeared genuinely frightened and remorseful. But I had learned over the past 2 years not to trust appearances where my children were concerned. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "What's changed?" Cassandra looked at Derek, then back at me. "The criminal organization we were working with has been dismantled by the operations you funded. Most of the leadership has been arrested, and the remaining members are being hunted by law enforcement agencies around the world. Which means you're no longer useful to them," I realized. "Worse than that," Derek said. We're now liabilities. We know too much about their operations, and they're concerned that we'll be captured and provide information to prosecutors. There have been attempts on our lives. The people who promised to protect us in exchange for information about you are now trying to kill us to prevent us from testifying against them, Cassandra added. The irony was stark. My children had betrayed me to work with criminals, and now those same criminals were trying to eliminate them to avoid prosecution. What do you want from me? I asked. Protection, Derek said simply. We want to surrender to authorities and provide full cooperation with ongoing investigations, but we need guarantees that we'll be safe from retaliation while we're in custody. And we want to apologize, Cassandra added. Not because we're hoping for forgiveness or reduced sentences, but because we finally understand the magnitude of what we did to you. I leaned back in my chair, processing their request. They were asking me to use my resources to protect them from the same criminal organizations that they had helped target me. They wanted me to save them from the consequences of their own betrayal. Tell me about these criminal organizations, I said. How extensive are their operations? How many other families are they targeting? For the next hour, Cassandra and Derek provided detailed information about the criminal networks they had been working with. The scope was even larger than my security teams had realized. The organizations were operating in 12 countries, targeting hundreds of wealthy families, and generating tens of millions of dollars annually through exploitation, blackmail, and asset theft. They described sophisticated operations where family members were recruited as inside sources, providing access to private information that could be used for various criminal purposes. Some victims were simply blackmailed privately. Others had their reputations destroyed through strategic release of compromising information. The most valuable targets were subjected to systematic campaigns designed to drive them to suicide or mental breakdown, creating opportunities for criminal collaborators to inherit or steal their assets. How many families have been destroyed by these operations? I asked. Dozens that we know of, Derek replied. Maybe hundreds. They've been operating for at least 5 years, and they've become very sophisticated at identifying vulnerable relationships within wealthy families. What made our family vulnerable? Cassandra looked down at her hands. We were greedy and entitled. When they approached us with the opportunity to make money from your private life, we didn't think about the consequences. We just saw dollar signs and social media fame. And we assumed that you would eventually forgive us because we were your children, Derek added. We thought family bonds were stronger than business relationships, so we could exploit you without permanently damaging our relationship. Instead, you discovered that business relationships often have more integrity than family relationships, I observed. We learned that the hard way, Cassandra said. The criminals we worked with were more loyal to each other than we were to you. They honored their agreements with us right up until we became inconvenient. Meanwhile, we destroyed our relationship with the one person who had always protected and supported us. I considered their request for protection carefully. On one hand, they were asking me to use my resources to save them from consequences that were entirely of their own making. On the other hand, their cooperation with ongoing investigations could help dismantle criminal networks that were targeting hundreds of other families. If I arrange protection for you during your cooperation with authorities, what guarantee do I have that you'll provide complete and truthful information? You don't, Derek said honestly. You'll have to trust that we've finally learned the difference between right and wrong, and that we understand this is our only chance to do something good with the information we have. We know we don't deserve your help, Cassandra added. But there are other families out there who are going through what you went through, and we have information that could protect them. I made my decision. I'll arrange for your safe surrender and provide security during your cooperation with investigations. But I want you to understand that this doesn't change anything between us personally. You're still facing serious criminal charges, and you'll likely spend years in prison regardless of your cooperation. We understand, they said in unison. And I want detailed information about every criminal operation you've been involved with, every family you've helped exploit, and every person who has been harmed by these organizations. We'll tell you everything, Derek promised. Over the next 3 days, my security team coordinated with international law enforcement to arrange for Cassandra and Derek's surrender. They were taken into custody by Interpol agents and transported to the United States under heavy security to prevent retaliation by criminal organizations. The information they provided during their debriefing sessions was extensive and devastating. They were able to identify the leadership of 7 different criminal organizations, provide evidence of crimes against over 200 families, and reveal the locations of millions of dollars in stolen assets. Their cooperation led to the largest international law enforcement operation targeting family exploitation in history. Within 6 months, over 400 criminals were arrested across 12 countries, and stolen assets worth over $800 million were recovered for victims. But perhaps more importantly, their testimony revealed the full scope of how criminal organizations exploit family relationships to target wealthy individuals. The information led to the development of new law enforcement techniques, prevention programs, and victim support services that would protect thousands of future families from similar exploitation. As part of their plea agreements, Cassandra and Derek were sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, with the possibility of reduced sentences based on their continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. They would serve their time in protective custody to prevent retaliation from remaining criminal organization members. During their sentencing hearing, both of them made statements addressing the families they had helped exploit. "I know that my actions contributed to the destruction of innocent families and the theft of billions of dollars from people who trusted their relatives," Cassandra said. "I can never undo the harm I've caused, but I hope that my cooperation with law enforcement will help prevent other families from experiencing the same betrayal." Derek's statement was more personal. "I betrayed the person who loved me most in the world, and I helped criminals destroy the lives of people I had never even met. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what I've done, even though I know forgiveness may never be possible." After their sentencing, I was approached by the lead federal prosecutor handling the case. "Mrs. Walker, your children's cooperation has been instrumental in dismantling the largest family exploitation network we've ever encountered. Their information has helped us protect hundreds of families and recover assets that would have been lost forever." "Does that justify what they did to me?" I asked. "Nothing justifies what they did to you," he replied. "But their willingness to risk their lives to provide this information has prevented countless other families from experiencing similar betrayal. In some sense, they've turned their criminal knowledge into a form of justice for other victims." I thought about this perspective as I considered the broader impact of everything that had happened. My children's betrayal had led to the largest philanthropic initiative in history, the dismantling of international criminal networks, and the protection of thousands of families from exploitation. Their evil had inadvertently generated enormous good for the world, but the personal cost had been devastating. I had lost my children, not just to the criminal justice system, but to the realization that they were capable of systematic exploitation and betrayal. Even their ultimate cooperation and remorse couldn't undo the fundamental truth that they had seen me as a commodity to be monetized, rather than a person to be loved and protected. 6 months after their sentencing, I received letters from both of them. Cassandra's letter was filled with detailed apologies and descriptions of the therapy she was receiving in prison to understand how she had become capable of such betrayal. Derek's letter was shorter but more profound, simply stating that he finally understood the difference between love and exploitation, and that he was grateful I had taught him that lesson, even though it had cost him everything. I didn't respond to either letter immediately. I needed time to process whether their apparent remorse was genuine, or simply another attempt to manipulate me for their own benefit. Instead, I focused on the positive outcomes that had emerged from this tragic situation. The charitable organizations I had funded were thriving and expanding their impact. The Walker Institute for Innovation had developed breakthrough technologies for climate change mitigation. The National Family Privacy Protection Fund had helped over 5,000 families escape exploitation situations. The Morrison Foundation had opened 50 new mental health centers serving underserved communities. Most importantly, the legal and social changes triggered by our case had made family exploitation significantly more difficult and dangerous for criminal organizations. New privacy laws provided stronger protections for victims. Law enforcement agencies had developed specialized units for investigating family-based crimes, and public awareness of these issues had increased dramatically. The viral video that had started this entire chain of events was now used in law enforcement training programs to teach investigators how to recognize signs of family exploitation. My breakdown, which had once been entertainment for millions of strangers, was now a tool for protecting other families from similar experiences. A year after my children's imprisonment, I made a decision that surprised even my closest advisors. I established the Cassandra and Derek Walker Rehabilitation Fund, a program designed to help family members who had been coerced into exploiting their relatives by criminal organizations. The program provided legal representation, therapy, job training, and financial support for people who wanted to escape exploitation networks and rebuild their relationships with the families they had betrayed. It was based on the recognition that not everyone who participates in family exploitation does so purely out of greed or malice. Some are manipulated or coerced by sophisticated criminal operations. Helena questioned the wisdom of creating a program that bore my children's names. Inez, this could be seen as an attempt to rehabilitate their public image, or as evidence that you're not thinking clearly about their crimes. It's not about rehabilitating their image, I replied. It's about recognizing that criminal organizations are sophisticated at exploiting family relationships, and that some people who participate in these schemes are victims as well as perpetrators. But your children weren't victims. They initiated the exploitation and actively participated in expanding it. That's true. But their case also revealed how criminal organizations use incremental escalation to trap people in increasingly serious crimes. Someone who starts by secretly recording a family member for social media content can end up working with international criminals before they fully understand what's happening. The fund was controversial, with many victim advocates arguing that it was inappropriate to provide support for people who had betrayed their own families. But it was also effective, helping over 200 people escape criminal organizations and reconcile with their families over its first year of operation. More importantly, it generated valuable intelligence about how criminal organizations recruit and control family members, leading to more effective prevention and intervention strategies. 2 years after establishing the fund, I received an unexpected visitor. Derek had been granted temporary release from prison to testify in a major international criminal case, and he had requested permission to meet with me during his brief freedom. We met in a conference room at the federal courthouse, under the supervision of 2 U.S. Marshals. Derek looked healthier than he had during our meeting in Geneva, but he also carried himself with a gravity and seriousness that was completely different from the carefree young man I remembered. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said. "And thank you for creating the Rehabilitation Fund. I've been working with some of the people it's helped, and I've seen how much good it's doing." "You've been working with other victims?" "As part of my cooperation agreement, I've been helping federal agents understand how criminal organizations recruit and control family members. I've talked to dozens of people who got trapped in exploitation schemes, and many of them have stories very similar to mine and Cassandra's. What have you learned from those conversations?" That greed and entitlement make people vulnerable, but they're not the only factors. These criminal organizations are extremely sophisticated at identifying family dynamics that can be exploited. They look for adult children who feel undervalued, siblings who compete with each other for parental approval, and relatives who are struggling financially or professionally. And then they offer simple solutions to complex emotional problems. Exactly. They promise money, fame, attention, or revenge, depending on what they think will motivate each person. And they start with small requests that seem harmless, then gradually escalate the demands until people are trapped in serious criminal activity. I studied his face as he spoke. The narcissistic entitlement that had characterized his personality for years had been replaced by what appeared to be genuine insight and remorse. "Derek, do you understand why I can never trust you again?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Because trust requires the belief that someone will protect your interests, even when it conflicts with their own self-interest. Cassandra and I proved that we would sacrifice your well-being for our own benefit, and once that trust is broken, it can never be fully restored. And do you understand why I've donated your inheritance to charitable causes?" Because you realized that giving us billions of dollars would enable us to cause harm on a much larger scale. You chose to use that money to protect other families from people like us. His answers suggested a level of self-awareness that I had never seen from him before. But I had learned to be skeptical of dramatic personality changes, especially from people who had demonstrated sophisticated manipulation skills. "What do you want from this meeting?" I asked. "Nothing for myself," he replied. "My sentence is appropriate for my crimes, and I don't expect or want any reduction in punishment. I asked to see you because I wanted you to know that your response to our betrayal has saved hundreds of families from experiencing what you went through." "How do you know that?" "Because I've talked to federal agents who work on family exploitation cases, and they tell me that the laws, programs, and awareness campaigns that resulted from our case have dramatically reduced successful exploitation operations. Criminal organizations are having much more difficulty recruiting family members, and much less success monetizing private information. And you wanted me to know that the good outcomes justify your crimes?" "No," he said quickly. "Nothing justifies what we did to you. I wanted you to know that your response turned our evil into something good for the world, and that gives meaning to your suffering, even if it doesn't excuse our actions." We talked for another hour about the broader implications of family exploitation, the effectiveness of various prevention programs, and the long-term impact of the legal changes that had resulted from our case. Derek demonstrated detailed knowledge of these issues and appeared genuinely committed to using his experience to help other victims. As our meeting ended, he asked one final question. "Do you think there's any possibility that Cassandra and I could ever earn your forgiveness?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn through good behavior or sufficient punishment," I said finally. "Forgiveness is something I might choose to give for my own peace of mind, regardless of whether you deserve it." "Have you made that choice?" "Not yet. I'm still processing the magnitude of what you both did, and I'm still discovering the long-term implications of your actions. Maybe someday I'll be ready to forgive you, but that day isn't today." He nodded, accepting my answer without argument or plea. "I understand. And I want you to know that whether you ever forgive us or not, I will spend the rest of my life trying to prevent other families from experiencing the betrayal we caused." After he left, I sat alone in the conference room for a long time, thinking about the conversation and what it meant for my relationship with my children. They would be in prison for several more years, and even after their release, they would face lifelong consequences for their crimes. Their actions had destroyed our family relationship and caused immeasurable harm to hundreds of other families. But their ultimate cooperation had also led to the dismantling of criminal networks that might have operated for decades, harming thousands of additional families. Their testimony had resulted in the recovery of hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen assets. And their case had triggered legal and social changes that would protect future families from similar exploitation. The question I faced was whether their positive contributions after their crimes were sufficient to merit some form of reconciliation, or whether the magnitude of their original betrayal made reconciliation impossible regardless of their subsequent actions. I realized that I didn't need to answer that question immediately. The process of healing from such profound betrayal would take years, and my feelings about forgiveness might change as I gained more distance from the initial trauma. What I knew for certain was that my response to their betrayal had created positive outcomes that far exceeded the harm they had caused. The billions of dollars I had donated to charitable causes were generating compound benefits that would continue for decades. The legal and social changes triggered by our case were protecting families around the world. And the awareness raised by our story was helping people recognize and avoid exploitation schemes. My children had turned my private breakdown into public entertainment, but I had turned their betrayal into a global movement for family protection and criminal justice. They had exploited one vulnerable moment for temporary profit, but I had used their exploitation to create permanent protections for vulnerable families everywhere. The viral video that started this entire chain of events now had over 200 million views, but it was no longer just entertainment. It had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of family exploitation, a training tool for law enforcement, and a symbol of how victims can transform their suffering into protection for others. The money my children expected to inherit had instead funded the largest anti-exploitation initiative in history. Their betrayal had cost them their inheritance, their freedom, and their family relationships. But it had also generated billions of dollars in charitable giving and criminal justice improvements that would benefit society for generations. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I realized that justice had been served in ways that went far beyond criminal punishment. My children had faced legal consequences for their crimes, but more importantly, their evil had been transformed into good for the world. The cameras they had used to exploit me were now being used to protect other families. The money they'd expected to inherit was now being used to heal the victims of exploitation. The criminal networks they had joined were now being dismantled by the very investigations their cooperation had enabled. They had live-streamed my breakdown for the world to see, turning my pain into their profit. In response, I had streamed billions of dollars into better hands, turning their betrayal into hope for millions of people around the world. And for the first time since this entire ordeal began, I felt genuinely at peace with the choices I had made. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.